guys, it's Lien. I'm here with my July wrap-up on August 29th. How did that happen? I don't know. But it's been a while since I really sat down and made a proper video, so I'm just gonna do this really casually. I've got a cup of tea here. I'm not wearing a bra. I don't really have any makeup on. I don't know who's gonna watch this video since it's about July, but it is just books that I've read. I don't know, does that run out of time? It's probably fine, whatever, here we are. So without further ado, I'm just gonna go for it. As always, I'm gonna put timestamps down below along with the titles of the books I've read. So if you're only interested in hearing about one book, you can skip to that part of the video. I'll also put any kind of content warnings in the description as well instead of putting them in the video, because I might think of some later and some might be kind of spoilery, so that's just what I do. That's a little bit of housekeeping. That stands for all of my wrap-up videos. The first book I read in July was The Cutout Girl by Bart Van Es. This is nonfiction. So Bart Van Es, the author of this book, knew that there was a young Jewish girl who lived with his family for a time during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, and then came back after the war and became a real part of their family. But several decades later was totally cut out of the family, and he doesn't really know why. So he reconnected with her and wrote her story. So the real sort of point of the book, I guess, is Lien's story of being in hiding during the war, and then also how the trauma of that experience affected her throughout her life. So that story is the main focus of the book, but it also has memoir elements of Bart actually researching the book and connecting with Lien and creating a relationship with her, and also learning about his own family, and it has quite a bit of Dutch history in it as well. I really liked that memoir element, and one thing that does also is make it so Van Es can be very transparent about the writing process. So for example, there will be a chapter that will be a very vividly drawn episode from Lien's experience during the war. And then it'll come back to the present where he'll be talking to her, and he reveals that she doesn't really have much memory about it. It's just a very vague outline. And he then will say how he came to fill in the details of how that might have actually happened. And I just think in terms of writing about real events, that's a really upstanding and honest way to do it. So it doesn't feel exploitative and it doesn't feel artificial. And it also is pretty interesting. One thing that I thought was kind of weird, this is a small gripe, but it did bug me, is that he very often talks about how pretty and beautiful Lien is, as if that's important in some way in what happened to her. And I think he was just trying to be nice, but that's just such typical man shit. Van Es isn't exactly an incredible writer, but he is a great storyteller and he has a great instinct for connections. So he'll look at something that happened in the lead up to the war and talk about how something happening today is mirroring that. It is a story about the past, but it's also very much a story about Europe and the Netherlands today. I learned a lot from this book, and I also found it very engaging and moving. To drink my tea before it gets cold. I always let my tea get cold. Right. The next book I read was Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward, and Jesmyn Ward has been on my radar for a really long time, but this was the first book I ever read by her. And I'm so glad I did, because spoiler alert, I loved it. Salvage the Bones is about a 14-year-old girl named Esh who is coming to terms with the discovery that she is pregnant while she and her brothers try to keep their dogs, puppies, alive, essentially. And it's set in the, I think, 14 days leading up to Hurricane Katrina in southern Mississippi. Throughout the book, Esh often draws parallels between what she's going through and the Greek myths that she's been reading for school, and she's particularly drawn to Medea, and I think she sees herself sort of as a Medea type figure, or she sees Medea as being similar to her. She really relates with that character. There's a lot to unpack there about how, you know, in Greek myth, one of the major themes is sort of free will and predetermination and being playthings of the gods, and how that sort of mirrors us as readers watching these characters fuck around while we know that their lives are about to be turned upside down by one of the biggest natural disasters in US history. This is an incredible novel. Jesmyn Ward's writing is absolutely gorgeous, but at the same time, really visceral. She doesn't shy away from the ugliness and brutality of life, and the way she describes these things sometimes really are like, ooh, gut-wrenching. Also, interestingly, despite being told exactly when this book takes place, it has a sort of timeless feel to it, and if you've ever been to the Deep South, you might know that it has this feeling of being in another world outside of time, and so I thought that was really nicely captured. Anyway, long story short, I loved this and I can't wait to read more Jesmyn Ward. I definitely will be doing that. Okay, the next book I read was The Ex by Alafair Burke. You don't remember, a couple months ago, I think in June, I read her other book, which is The Wife, and I didn't really expect to read more Alafair Burke, but then after reading two such kind of like heavy books, I really felt the need to read something light and fun and wacky, which from precedent, I expected this one to be. But to be honest, when I was like looking through Goodreads to remind myself what I read right before I filmed this video, I honestly was like totally surprised to see this on there. That just goes to show how memorable this book is. This book is about a lawyer named Olivia Randall, and she actually is the lawyer defending the dude in the other book, The Wife. So fun little expanded universe kind of thing. Anyway, her ex-fiance is accused of murder, and when his daughter gets in touch with her, she decides to defend him because she feels really strongly about the fact that there's no way that he could have committed this crime. And, you know, there are twists and turns, ups and downs. Really, I don't have that much to say about this. Just sort of a middle-of-the-road, mindless reading experience. Like, I obviously didn't hate it, but, like, I don't really think there's anything special about it. It did what I wanted it to do. It just sort of cleansed my palate to head on to bigger and better things, I suppose. This sounds really mean. I'm not trying to be mean. Alafair Burke is a fine writer. It's fine. I will say, I think Olivia Randall is a pretty good character. Although for some reason she's like totally clueless about technology, even though she's like 40. And that just kind of bugged me when she was always like, oh my god, an email? How open? I don't know why that was necessary. But other than that, she's like a pretty badass, cool, complex character. It's probably the best thing I have to say about this book. Okay, so the next book I read was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Now, I read this because Christy over at Books Are Neat read it a few months ago, and she didn't have enough good things to say about it. She was like totally obsessed. And even though I haven't read fantasy in ages, I decided to read it because I'm just trying to, you know, dip my toes into new things, expand my horizons. And I'm so glad I did because this was so much fun and I loved it. It's a fantasy novel for adults, and it's set in like a China-inspired country that's called just the Empire, I'm pretty sure. And the Empire has a long history of conflict with a neighboring country. And so in order to sort of like prepare for the next conflict, they've created this countrywide like standardized test essentially that everyone takes when they're 13, and it decides where you can go to school, and the top scorers for each district go to this school where they train to become generals. Is it 13 they take it or 15? I think it's 15. Yeah, it's 15, but the book starts when Rin, the main character, is 13. So she is an orphan who's both her parents died during the last war. They call them the Poppy Wars. And she is in like a really shitty home life situation. She is like horribly abused and essentially just used to like work for these opium dealers. And she decides at 13 that she's going to work really, really, really hard to do well on this test and get out of her situation. And she's so successful in this that she gets the top score and she gets to go to the like crazy school where she'll learn to become a general. It's a huge honor and she's really excited. I thought that this was just going to be a boarding school story, but actually the book covers probably like it's hard to say, like 5 to 10 years of her life. So maybe the first third to one half is school, and then the rest is after she's finished with school. This is kind of a weird one for me to have liked as much as I did, because I usually like books that are pretty like low on plot but high on like beautiful writing. And like R.F. Kuang's writing, I can't really say that much for it. It's not horrible, but it's not like, it's nothing special, you know, it's not super sophisticated. But the story is just like mind-blowing. Like, I never expected it to go where it went, and I never even took the time to try and guess what was going to happen, because it was just like I was fully in this story and letting it take me by the hand and drag me through hell, essentially. And Kuang is also awesome on character, because I loved all of them, and even the ones that were like barely in it just really like came off the page and were all really distinct and well drawn. Fun fact, while I was reading this, I stupidly forgot that it was the first in a series, so I was getting to the end and I was getting really pissed off that all these things were set up and never followed through. I was like, what the fuck? What editor let this go? And then I finished it and I was like, oh, definitely there are sequels. And the first sequel just came out and I already put a hold on it for my library, so I'm reading it. The next book I read in July was A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. Every time I say July, I think of a roommate that I used to have named Robbie, who was from Manchester, and in his accent he would be like, July, July, and so I always think of that. Anyway, I kind of reviewed this a little bit, very briefly, in my last video, and I sort of complained about the character of Ruth and how she like is complaining constantly about this beautiful place where she lives, and she's shitting on her husband all the time. But in retrospect, I'm pretty sure that she's supposed to be like an avatar for the author, and so now I feel a little bit bad about what I said, and also I'm slightly less annoyed. Anyway, so this is about a Japanese American woman named Ruth who one day, while she's on a walk on the beach, she finds this Hello Kitty lunchbox, and inside the Hello Kitty lunchbox is a diary by a 16-year-old Japanese girl named Nao, and the book alternates between Nao's story in the diary and Ruth's experience of reading this book with her husband. Not the book, the diary. Reading the diary with her husband. This is an absolutely gorgeous book. Ozeki's writing is very much to my taste. There's some magical realism here, or actually like quite a bit of magical realism as we get to the end, which I feel like is very much in the tradition of Japanese literature, or at least like what I associate with Japanese literature. It's also quite meta and philosophical, so like if that's not your thing, maybe avoid. But I loved it. I think like most readers, I enjoyed Nao's chapters more. She's really funny and has a really like cool and distinct voice, and it's interesting because even though her story is sort of bleak and like really horrible things happen to her, she still maintains this really like upbeat tone even when she is extremely depressed. And meanwhile, Ruth's life is like pretty dope, and she is constantly like bitching about everything. So that's a fun little contrast there. This book has quite a lot to say of like the culture of being overworked and being a workaholic, particularly in Eastern countries, and also about like mental health in these countries, which is a subject that I find quite interesting, and it's like really ripe for exploration in literature. And, yeah, this was just like a really fun but really rewarding reading experience, so do recommend. That's all I have to say about books for now. I'll see you again hopefully soon. I'm thinking about doing, I've been thinking about this for ages, like months, doing like favorite books of the first half of the year video. It's a bit late for it, but like, do I care? Do you care? Let me know what you think down below. I'm obviously just gonna do what I want, but I like your input as well. That's all I have to say. I'm just gonna end it. Bye.